Healthcare, and member of the NESHCo Board of Directors. Our lunch panel today is called The Connected Patient. It promises to shed some light on the patient perspective and the growing participatory medicine movement. It's my honor today to introduce our moderator, Dan Dunlop, President of Jennings. Not only is Dan a very loyal friend of NESHCo, a board member, and a very successful lamplighter veteran, he's also a really great guy. He leads an impressive team of healthcare marketing and audience engagement professionals. His staff, while based in North Carolina, has a special affection for New Englanders, and especially the Boston Red Sox. With clients like Tufts Health, Lowell General Hospital, Lawrence General Hospital, Signature Healthcare, and Dartmouth Hitchcock, it's safe to say they really know our market. We'd like to extend our special thanks to Dan for sponsoring the session and for assembling an esteemed panel that includes a lifelong patient who began writing about chronic illness in 2006, the co-founder of a company which provides safe online communities for patients, a 3-time cancer survivor and ardent patient advocate who, among other things, moderates the weekly breast cancer survivors Twitter chat, and what Dan calls an e-parent, a mom advocating for her child. Please welcome Dan and our panel.
Thank you, Annie. I'm going to take Annie with me everywhere I go, and she can just introduce me. I love it. Okay, I'm not a huge fan of podiums, so I'm going to come down here for a second while I talk to you and introduce this great panel. And the good news I have to share with you today is you don't have to listen to me talking for 45 minutes. So it's a relief. NESHCo gets a year off. Instead, you get to listen to some really dynamic people that I respect and revere. I have been on a kick for years trying to get healthcare conferences and healthcare marketing conferences to have patient panels, to include the voice of the patient in these activities. Because you think we're healthcare marketers and communicators. Most of you just saw Jim Rattray's presentation. I mean, if we want to do our jobs well, whether we're clinicians or marketers, the first thing that comes is listening to the patient and to the families of the patients, right? It's a no-brainer. But are they at our conferences? No. So I've been on this rampage, and luckily the people at NESHCo have the wisdom, and they said, yes, let's do this. And luckily I have great friends who would come and take part, give up their day to share with me some of their perspective and tell their stories. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our speakers. And the one I've known the longest is Alicia Staley. Alicia is a 3-time cancer survivor. She's a wonderful person. And Alicia and I first met, I guess maybe 8 years ago. I was online. I was pretty new to Twitter at the time, and I was trying to advocate for Tufts Medical Center. They were in a managed care battle with Blue Cross and Blue Shield at the time. The negotiations had fallen apart, and I was on social media hammering Blue Cross and Blue Shield. I really needed help getting the word out and getting advocates for Tufts Medical Center on board, and Alicia jumped to my rescue. And at the time, I probably had 4 Twitter followers, and she had like 3,000. So she's been my idol ever since, and she's been a friend ever since. And one of the things I love about social media is having that opportunity to step out of the virtual relationship and actually meet people in real life that you've known. And Alicia and I have had the benefit of doing that. Alicia started the Staley Foundation in October 2007 as a way to work toward education, advocacy, and assistance for those affected by cancer as patients, caregivers, families, or friends. She shares her passion and enthusiasm for helping the cancer community by contributing to her awesome cancer survivor website you guys can check out, and the hitcommunity.org. And she's one of the moderators, as Annie mentioned, the weekly breast cancer social media Twitter chat, and I'd love her to share that with you, because I think Twitter chats are something we don't know enough about, but it's a place patients are really turning for community and information and resources. Next, I have the highly educated Catherine Rose. I thought I had too much education until I met Catherine. Now I feel like I need to go back to school. Catherine is what Alicia calls a neat parent. And Alicia originally put me in touch with Catherine. That's how I know Catherine. Although we do participate in the same Twitter chat each week, the Healthcare Leader Twitter chat, and we've developed a friendship through that, so it's great to have her here today. Catherine is a product manager for healthcare lighting applications at Philips. She completed 3 degrees in 4 years at NC State University, so we have a North Carolina connection there. Then she went to Stanford for a PhD in mechanical engineering, rounding that out with an MBA in finance from the University of Massachusetts, because a PhD from Stanford wasn't enough. But what's interesting, and you can read about this on Catherine's blog, is she says that her real education started when she became a mom. And she has 2 children who do not have typical health issues. Even her most typical child, it is not typical. And she is an advocate for them. And inspired by her experience with her daughter Alexis, she's actually developed a product called LightAid, and I'll let her tell you about that. Catherine works to support other families in their challenging medical journeys. All right, so that's 2 of them. Then Lori Edwards. Lori is an author. I will tell you, right now, she's one of my favorite authors. This is her book, Life Disrupted. She's got 2 books. I've read them both. I've reviewed them on my blog. She is, not only is the content important because she's writing about chronic illness, it's important for all of us to read and understand, but she's also a really good writer, so it's actually a pleasure to read her books. And I made her sign my books today. Because it's the first time we met in person, but we've talked online. But Lori is a patient advocate and health science writer whose work has appeared in the New York Times, Boston Globe Magazine, Psychology Today, and WBUR, among many others. She has dealt with several chronic illnesses since childhood. Lori's the author of Life Disrupted, Getting Real About Chronic Illness in Your 20s and 30s. And In the Kingdom of the Sick, which is the most recent one I just read. It's a social history of chronic illness in America, which was voted Editor's Choice for Adult Books in 2013 by Booklist. She teaches writing for health sciences at Northeastern University in Boston. And then last but not least, the token male on the panel, Amir Levkovich. He is co-founder of an organization I love. It's called Inspire, or you might know it as Inspire.com. His title there is Vice President for Partnerships. Inspire is an online platform that connects patients, families, friends, caregivers, and health professionals for health and wellness support. It's really tremendous. I recommend checking it out online. Amir is leading Inspire's efforts in partnering with patient advocacy groups, as well as pharmaceutical, biotechnology, and medical device companies. Amir has a BA from George Washington University and his MBA from Babson College. He didn't go to Stanford. He visited. See, we read about Stanford. But I will say Inspire has a great relationship with Stanford. So.
Did you say Stanford or Stanford?
Wrong state, yeah. And so he has his MBA from Babson. It was at Babson where he became fascinated with social media and decided to make social media his career. So this is our group today, and I'm going to start with Alicia Staley. And Alicia and I, we were preparing for this panel. I went to Alicia and said, Alicia, I want to do this panel at the NESHCo conference. Can you help me put it together? And she agreed to help me. And the first thing she did was she just sat down and shared her story with me. And one of the things that really caught my attention in her story was the fact that when Alicia was first diagnosed with Hodgkin's, when she was a college student, social media wasn't a factor. So it was a very different experience from later in life when she was diagnosed with breast cancer, where there were online resources and ways to connect with people. So Alicia, I'd love you to tell us some of that story. You've got a minute and a half.
Okay. Thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
So I guess Dan invited me to give you what the before and after looks like in terms of networking and communications in some ways in the context of my cancer diagnosis. So I was a sophomore in college. I wanted to be an astronaut. I haven't been to Stanford in the context of education, but I haven't visited. So I was on a path at Syracuse University to be an aerospace engineer, and I was really enjoying my time and my classes there. In my sophomore year, I became very sick, actually, this spring semester. And it took a while to figure it out. But unfortunately for me, I was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma, stage 2A. And I immediately took a medical leave from school to begin treatment for that. And my Hodgkin's surgery basically took about 3 years from start to finish to get through that disease. And it was a combination of surgery, radiation, and chemotherapy. And I think the thing that, to me, that was the hardest for me to get through that time was the isolation. I was immediately the only college student at Syracuse University dealing with a major cancer diagnosis that I was aware of, or that within my community there at Syracuse. And going to the cancer center every day was a scary experience for me, because I essentially at 19, 20 years old, I was going into a room where I was the youngest person by far. Because at that point, your time and your treatment were very specific to when you were diagnosed, where you were diagnosed. I'm not talking about where physically, I'm talking about where regionally or geographically, what hospital association or what hospital community you become associated with. So if there aren't other young adults going through cancer at the time that you're there, you have a tendency to sort of be lumped in with, I like to say it was me and all the old guys in Western New York that happened to be dealing with lung cancer or various cancers that they had. So I was a young cancer patient, very isolated and very alone. And I've talked with Catherine before that. I like to say my mom was an e-parent before the idea of this engaged parent or engaged patient came along, because I got very sick while I was going through chemotherapy, to the point where the doctors and nurses had suggested that they stop treatment until I began putting back on weight, actually get healthier than I was. And I'll never forget seeing my mom sitting on the floor in the Cancer Center library, going through cookbooks. And if that doesn't raise an eyebrow, the fact that they actually have cookbooks in a Cancer Center library is sort of amazing. But my mom, after digging through all these different research books and research protocols, found just a cookbook on how to be well. Found a couple recipes that she wanted to take home and help me try to eat a little bit more. And my mom was taking the book, walking out of the library, and she got stopped by the librarian, who said, "I'm sorry, you can't check this book out." My mom said, "Why?" "Because you're not a doctor." And at this day and age, this was in the early 90s, the fact that simple information like this was sort of locked and sort of put away in a library, not to be shared readily, I think was an eye-opening experience. There was nothing like the internet. There was nowhere else to turn. But I'm happy to say that my mom looked at the librarian that was actually blocking the door and said, "I'm taking the book home with me. Because my daughter, I need to take care of my daughter." And she walked right out of the Cancer Center, and I walked right behind her, and I said, "Let's go, Mom." So I think when people ask me today, what drove you to be an advocate, I just say my mom, because I learned from her very early on that if you're not going to advocate for yourself or look out for yourself, there really is no one else to do that. When I finished treatment in 1994, I actually moved to Boston and have been in the Boston area ever since. I got my first job out of college, moved to the area, and really sort of stayed out of the cancer community. I didn't feel a need to be involved in any way. But unfortunately, the area that I grew up in, Western New York, I wasn't the only Hodgkin's lymphoma patient, if you will. I had 5 other people in my neighborhood that were actually diagnosed at the same time. And the 4 gentlemen that were diagnosed with Hodgkin's disease have subsequently passed away. And my best friend was also diagnosed with lymphoma, and she's not doing very well actually today. She's just had a heart transplant from the radiation treatment that she had from the chemotherapy. So I feel a sense of urgency as a Hodgkin's survivor to understand and make sure that the long-term survivors are aware of some of these long-term effects that we've had to deal with. Hodgkin's, unfortunately, for me, was not my only time with cancer. In 2004, and then again in 2007, I was actually diagnosed with breast cancer. So if I hadn't had enough of the cancer center, I got to spend a little bit more time there. And I actually was treated at Tufts Medical Center for those 2 bouts of breast cancer. And again, I realized that my treatment and my options for care were really centered around where and when I've been diagnosed. And I noticed that my support groups became very focused on people that were diagnosed at the same time, that happened to be going to the cancer center at the same time. And there was no one really that sort of fit that profile of young 30-year-old person that's now had Hodgkin's 3 times. And I sort of felt out of place in these support groups. But for me, there was a game changer between the first time I was diagnosed and the second time I was diagnosed, and that was Google. And obviously, the first time I was diagnosed with breast cancer, I got off the phone with my oncologist. I went right to Google and typed in mucinous carcinoma because I wanted to know everything about what I had just been diagnosed with. And of course, as you know, you type in mucinous carcinoma or breast cancer, and you're presented with 37 million pages on everything that you need to know, and a few things you probably don't need to know about your diagnosis. And I think that was sort of the dawning moment for me, that we have to start building communities that are very specific about the right information at the right time, at the right place, for the right outcomes. And that's sort of a mantra that I live by. It has to be curated, trustworthy information that patients can deal with. And I wasn't finding that just by going to my support groups on a weekly basis. So I again turned to the internet. I turned to Twitter and decided to do a search on the terms Hodgkin's and breast cancer survivor in Twitter. And I was immediately presented with 4 profiles of women across the U.S. that had self-identified, if you will, on their Twitter profiles that they had battled both Hodgkin's and breast cancer. And I thought, here are my peeps. I couldn't believe. So I immediately changed my Twitter profile to say, Hodgkin's survivor, breast cancer survivor, because we're looking for each other. And I reached out to the very first woman on the list. Her name is Allison. She lives in California. She didn't go to Stanford, but that's okay. I think she was at UCLA. But we had very similar profiles. She was diagnosed when she was 19, diagnosed with breast cancer when she was 35. And I couldn't believe how we had made this connection, and it was all virtually. And we've done some work together. I've met other breast cancer survivors now on Twitter, and we decided the support group model is great for people that want to go to the hospital, connect with people that are perhaps going through treatment cycles during the same time. But what about when the hospitals and the healthcare organizations in your community start cutting back on these needed services? Where do you turn? And I basically have built a virtual community of breast cancer survivors around a hashtag on Twitter called BCSM, which stands for Breast Cancer Social Media, where we can essentially turn to our virtual support group at any point during the week by simply sending out a tweet that has the hashtag BCSM on it, and we call it our bat signal. And we meet weekly on Monday nights, and we have attracted an audience of not only patients and survivors, but husbands that are caregivers for their wives. We've also attracted and had members participate with us that are male breast cancer survivors. And there's a lot more out there than you realize. And they're very active in social media. But we've built a community where we can turn to each other at any point and say, how can we help you get through today?
And when you say community, you mean community, right?
I mean community.
Yeah.
And it really is, and I've been out, I just spoke at a conference in Las Vegas for the American Society of Breast Surgeons, and they happened to invite other members of the BCSM community, and it was the first time I actually had met some of these people that I've been talking with online for years. And I think we talked earlier about the idea that in some ways it's like a family reunion. These connections that we are making are very real, and they're helping sort of expand the support network that traditionally has been in place over the years. And for me, I think the thing that I've learned in terms of community and building communities online is information is the currency of patient communities. And that information has to be trustworthy. It has to be from a trustworthy source, because if it's not, that community will fall apart very, very quickly. So that's my commitment.
Thank you, Alicia.
Thank you.
And the point I would make is all of us work for organizations that can provide that trustworthy content and that information that is the currency that Alicia's talking about. Unfortunately, as an industry, we've been slow to do that.
Right.
Catherine Rose, you're up, and I'd love you to talk about, you are an e-parent, and I'd love you to talk about advocating for your daughter and the role that online communities have played in that. We were talking some about the Facebook community. If you just jump in.
Yeah, so some background that you didn't hear. They let me do some talking, so that's good. So my daughter was actually, you might have forgotten that I try to be very efficient, get all these degrees very quickly. So I was also one of those people that was going to change the world by the time I was 30. But I also wanted kids, right? So those might be conflicting. But I became pregnant with twins, and I thought that was like, that's as efficient as you can get.
Well done.
I wanted 2 kids close in age, and it's just one maternity leave. I mean, like rock star status here, right? God or someone decided that that wasn't really meant to be. So what happened in my pregnancy, it was a high-risk pregnancy because it was multiples. Caitlin, one of the twins, died at 29 weeks, and so I was pregnant and taken to the hospital and made sure that Alexis was doing just fine. I spent 8 weeks on bed rest with alive baby Alexis and dead baby Caitlin. Thankfully, Alexis was like, I'm going to stay put. I'm just fine. She was born at 4 pounds. She was born at 37 weeks. She was 4 pounds, and she stayed in the NICU for 2.5 months. In that period of time, she inherited or was diagnosed or got 18 different specialists. So she's considered medically complex, which isn't sort of like, it's like that designation for like, certified organic. You get to say sort of whatever you want to say almost. So medically complex to us means you have a heart, cardiologist, you have a GI doctor, you have 18 different specialists looking at a kid. The nice thing about Alexis is she's one entire kid, right? Like, so even though she's got all these specialists, she's actually just one little kid, so that's good. Genetically, she's definitely got congenital anomalies, but no one knows what she is, so that's kind of a cool thing. We're very unique in that way. Because no one could sort of tell us what was going on with Alexis, my husband and I were like, well, we still wanted the 2 kids close in age. So along comes Jessica 16 months later. And the only thing that she has in common with her sister is that she decided that a heart defect was the easiest one to pick up. So she actually had the same heart defect that Alexis had. Alexis did hers, had hers repaired with a cath. Jessica decided that cath way was just a little bit too easy, so she ended up with open heart surgery, which is why Dan was like, well, typical.
Typical.
That's not quite typical. My husband also has a PhD from Stanford, so we can sort of make fun of that. So, with 2 PhDs,
It runs in the family.
we were going to make sure that all the care was there. As a genetically undiagnosed person, we couldn't, I don't want to say that Alicia had an easy job. She just went down easy as she created it, but, we were sort of orphans and rare, and we don't know what to call you, and basically the geneticist everywhere we said was, you're not these things. When Alexis turned 3, one of the school advisors, the psychologist for the school, said, you really should hang out with these charge syndrome people. And I was like, well, but we're not charged. We know we're not charged. And charge is an acronym that stands for a whole lot of stuff going wrong with kids. And it was like this big, like, epiphany moment in my life. I was like, oh my God. So at the time it was a listserv, and it was a parent-run listserv. And then it moved into a Facebook group. The Facebook group now has like 4,400 members in the Facebook group. And what it did for us was it gave me that, hey, we need a doctor that does this. Can anybody tell me what it is? You know, can you tell me, recommend? My kid sort of seems to have this little twitch thing that goes on the side of the shoulder, but it's only when it's really hot outside. You know, like crazy, you know, like your normal mom stuff, but not the normal mom stuff because you've got the medically complex kids. And, you know, you worry about things like, well, did they aspirate something, or did they, you know, are they going to be alive tomorrow? You know, just not typical stuff. But typical. And one of the great things, and this was what Alicia and I were chatting about earlier, is the charge syndrome group gets together every 2 years in person for a conference, and it's like a big family reunion because now you know all these families from around the world, but you've never met them in real life, and it's the first time that you get to see the kids that you see in 2D and their progress that you get to see as pictures on Facebook, and then you get to see them in real life and go, oh yeah, you had that cool stroller, oh yeah, we were looking at that thing, you know, oh, did you get insurance to cover that? No, we had to go through this way, and we got this foundation to pay for it, and hey, did you go to that summer camp? Yeah, that was fantastic, you know. So it's this, just a hodgepodge of things just to support the kids, and I can't think of off the top of my head all the different places, but it's tremendous. It's like phone a nurse. And we have a couple of geneticists that are on the list in the Facebook group, as well as some doctors, but not as present as they should be, but definitely a lot of, I mean, we're everywhere. You know, we're rare, but we're everywhere. So it's fantastic. One of the kids, this is a sort of a funny, a person that I met through that. She lived in Washington, D.C., but she was going to move to Boston, and it happened to be that she and her son had charge syndrome. And she was like, we need to get a hold of the doctors, we're moving from D.C., we have great support here, Catherine, what do you do? And I was like, well, here's Alexis's medical record that I hold that's 5 pages long. That's all the doctors and all the appointments, and I just sent it to her, and I was like, and here's our Rolodex of all the doctors that we see. And so she could go through and go, okay, at least this is the first step of like, who do I call in all the specialties, like, you know. She's since moved on from some of my selected doctors, but that's okay too. Sure. It was a great first step for her, so a lot of things to be built on, sort of getting support in the communities.
Definitely hear some themes in common already, so thank you. Lori, my favorite author over there. Lori, one of the themes I read in Life Disrupted that it just struck me, probably because of my context or whatever I bring as I'm reading it, but was isolation, you know, as someone with chronic illness, and then your quest to find community and the delight of finding community. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So I've been a patient since birth, right? My very first breath, I was born a little early, my lungs collapsed. I didn't go home for a long time, kind of auspiciously getting for a lifetime respiratory patient. But, you know, I didn't actually get accurately diagnosed until I was 23. So there was a big gap there, gap filled with weeks and weeks in hospital. Probably by the time I was a freshman in high school, I'd had 20, 25 surgeries. I feel like I grew up at Children's Hospital Boston, so I guess I was fortunate that I could drive down Route 9 and get there. You know, we knew as a child that I had an immune deficiency, and then I had what they told me was atypical asthma, right? So I was a kid that was always in the ER and like kind of carried my nebulizer around with me everywhere, or heart monitor, depending on the day. But the older I got, the worse I was getting. So it was sort of, let's throw more steroids at her, and hopefully that will help. It didn't, but it did get me to the point where I could break my fingers typing from all the steroids. So, you know, at the time, I never knew anything except being sick and sort of recovering, getting back to life, kind of having another crisis, getting back to my life. My parents both have serious illness and continue to, so I did grow up with at least that. If they knew what I was going through, I could see them kind of fight back against illness and persevere. But I certainly didn't know many sick kids. And, you know, it wasn't until I was in my 20s that I really thought about the term chronic illness. So something that we can treat, but we're never going to cure, right? I never identified, even though, you know, now we know 45% of Americans have at least one. Many of us collect several. So I was diagnosed at 23 with primary ciliary dyskinesia, or PCD. If you don't Google it accurately, you wind up going to the Pussycat Dolls. So, it's pretty rare. It's a lot like cystic fibrosis, which you're probably more familiar with. Probably no one has heard of PCD. I hadn't until I was finally diagnosed with it. So it really just means the cilia that line my respiratory tract. In my case, aren't there, which is like super duper rare, but generally it means they don't work. They're immobile, or dyskinesia, they don't move. So I don't have what I need to sort of flush debris out, keep infections away. So I have someone who comes to my house every day and claps me in 11 positions, sort of shake everything up, we cough it out. Very old school, but very effective. And I also have bronchiectasis, which is sort of a secondary condition as a result of all the infections. And then I have celiac disease, which is, you know, a lot more common. And when I was diagnosed all at the same time with these conditions, I was like, yes, there's something I can do, there's something I can treat. I just don't have to eat gluten and I'll be better. It's like the best news I've gotten all year. So it was really a game changer for me because, you know, as I mentioned, the older I got, my condition was deteriorating. So I wasn't just going to the ER, I was going to the ICU. And when I was in college, I didn't go to Stanford, but my niece might apply, so I have that. You know, I was at Georgetown University, and my sophomore apartment was directly across from the medical center, and that wasn't an accident. I got to live there because I was always at the hospital. And you know, I just wasn't responding. I was the atypical asthma patient, and you know, it was really at that point in my life when my doctors sort of began to say to me, well, maybe the problem is you. You know, you're just stressed out, it's finals time. And I would say, I've been sick at finals for 20 years now, that's not the problem. You know, maybe you're just not taking your medication. So well, obviously I'm taking my medication because my fingers break when I'm typing for finals. So I am taking my prednisone. And it was really a frustrating time because I felt like I was watching my life slip away, right? My friends were out and having fun, and I was in the ICU, and they were visiting me there. And that just wasn't how it should be. I shouldn't spend half of my college career looking at my apartment out my hospital window. So thankfully, I graduated, I came back to Boston, and through just a bunch of fortunate events, did get on the right path and did get a diagnosis. So obviously, physically, getting the right diagnosis was huge. And I'm now in the hospital so much less because I'm doing preventive things that make sense for me because I'm not an asthmatic. I'm someone with PCD. So we need to do secretions and airway clearance and long-term antibiotics appropriately. But mentally and emotionally, getting that diagnosis changed my life. Like so many people do, I went home and I immediately jumped on Google. And was like, let me find out everything I can about this condition. And this was 11 years ago now, so at the time, there was a really active Yahoo listserv. And that's immediately where I went, because I wanted to know, well, what is chest PT going to feel like? Is it going to hurt when people are clapping me? You know, what's the prognosis? With PCD, there's a huge range. So some people are okay for a long time, some people have double lung transplants. So what was that going to look like? It also causes infertility. So what was that going to do? So immediately it was sort of my sense of these are the answers, these are the lived experiences that nobody else could tell me. And that was really important for me. But it was also really validating because when you're getting sicker and sicker and the answers you're getting are, you're the problem, it's really incredibly frustrating. So for the first time, I felt like my label actually reflected my experiences. And it was a synergy that really helped me feel better physically, but feel better mentally and emotionally too. And I should say that, you know, PCD is a genetic disease. It's very rare. So, you know, you use the term orphan. So a rare orphan disease is any disease that affects fewer than 200,000 patients. So for me, there are an estimated 25,000 of us out there floating around. Much fewer than 1,000 have actually been appropriately identified, right? So I'm not going to bump into someone with PCD walking down the street. And usually if I'm walking down the street and I'm coughing, people are kind of fleeing me. So it was really amazing to have this virtual connection. I think it's helpful for all patients. And I started writing about chronic illness in young adults right around the time of my diagnoses, because I felt like there was nobody talking about what it's like to get through college, or how to disclose illness when you're dating and you're at a bar, or how to build a career when you have invisible illness. There's nobody talking about that. So that's when I first started writing about it. And so that's a universal that we want to see. People who have experiences like us. It's validating, it's informative, it's empowering, it's all those things. But for people with rare diseases, it's even more amazing because, the only time I've ever met someone with PCD in real life was through Facebook. And it was a woman that I had messaged with for years who lived in Ireland and happened to be in Boston to check it out. And we met, and it was probably the first, it was probably the only time that I'll meet someone in person. And so it was really amazing. I should add that for people with conditions like mine, we're actually discouraged from meeting when we're sick because we pass each other things that wouldn't really bother the average person. So on top of that, it was really great to have this very personal, physical connection. And for rare disease patients, it really just does open up a whole new world. But I think what's been really neat to see sort of evolve with the growth of the internet and social media, sort of my growth as a patient and a writer and an advocate, is just the possibilities of social media now. So, when I was first diagnosed, I just wanted all the emotional information, and I think that's so common, and it makes so much sense. But now that I've passed the diagnosis phase and sort of the acceptance, and I know which therapies work for me, and I know which antibiotics work, and I've gone through the high-risk pregnancy that took 5 years in the end, 12 hospital admissions to get through, I'm at a different point. And so what I want is intellectual information. And I think the reach of social media for rare diseases is amazing. We can connect and recruit each other for clinical trials. Actually, as a result of that for the PCD Foundation, I just got an email last week about the first ever PCD patient registry, where we're all contributing our information, and it's hopefully going to make a really big difference in terms of the genetic testing that they're working on. Because a big hurdle for us is diagnosis to begin with. We need to capture these people and prevent further disease progression. So the fact that there's now this registry that patients and parents, there's a lot of kids that we're connecting through on Facebook too, have the ability to do that and to reach out and to point to UNC Chapel Hill is doing a ton of research with PCD, so we can send families down there. We can enroll in clinical trials, can give them our information, knowing that it might really make a difference.
Just to kind of where we are right now as a company, we have about 500,000 members in Inspire, who have written almost 6 million posts over the past few years. This might sound crazy, and about 1 billion words of content that they've generated, all on their own. So we don't prompt them to write anything, we don't have any authoritative content. This is all user-generated. It's just amazing. And so some observations we've had in the past few years. You need to have kind of a structured and well-organized and safe environment for patients. So we have human moderators that make sure that people abide by the guidelines, that they're not trying to sell things or cause arguments. From day one, we have a kind of internal motto that the members, and I say members because we have patients and caregivers in the community. By caregivers is the family, typically the family members. If they don't trust the platform, the environment, they're not going to use it. So the trust is really hard to gain, but really easy to lose. And so we're very cognizant of that and do a lot of work to make sure that the members feel safe in the environment. We did a survey about a year or two ago, why do you use Inspire or even any other online health community? And the kind of the two equal reasons, the first one needed by a little bit is I need information, I need data. That's my initial, I just newly diagnosed, I have no idea what's going on, I need information. And the second, almost as close, was an emotional support. But kind of a little bit after that, the surprise is that I want to share my experience with somebody else to help someone new. So there's that aspect too, which is kind of obvious to us now, but in hindsight, we're surprised, nicely surprised about it. Also, from a demographic point of view, we're about 75% women in the community. Our average user is a 49-year-old woman. And of course, in different communities, it ranges, but even in something like prostate cancer, it's 50-50, male and female. We say the woman is the chief medical officer of the family. It's definitely true. In my family, every family I know, I have no, we get the bills from them, I have no idea what to do. And I work in the healthcare industry, I'm just like, give it to my wife, please, handle it. And out of all our members, a big chunk of them are in rare diseases and oncology. Those are the most intense activity, even if for a rare disease for 1,000 people, which might sound small, but in that condition, it's a huge population. Just a kind of a story I like to tell. There was a community that actually our first community was a women heart disease community, the group called Women Heart. Even though I think heart disease is top 1 or 2, 3 killers of women, it's not discussed. All the heart focuses on male heart disease, and women kind of, what about us? It's a huge problem for us too, so this nonprofit focuses on that. And so a few years ago, this conversation started to happen around a very rare heart condition called SCAD. I have to write it down. It's spontaneous coronary artery dissection. About a few hundred women get it a year, and it's when the outer layer of the artery pulls out and blocks the blood flow. It's like a barrier between the inner and outer layer, and it causes a clot and it causes a heart attack. It's very rare, and it's hard to diagnose. And this one woman posted a post on Inspire saying, all the SCAD ladies, put your hands up, Beyonce. Someone had to explain to me that's why we might get so excited about it, but that's, and all of a sudden you have people from Virginia, New Zealand, Israel, Asia, all over the world, all of a sudden finding each other about this. They would, this is another topic, when the online relationships go offline, and that happens a lot, which is really interesting. They would meet at conferences, and at one conference, as a group, there was like a few of them, not accosted, but approached a physician from Mayo Clinic, who researches in heart disease, especially women, and told her, you have 30 SCAD, or 20 SCAD patients, do clinical trial on us. And she did, and they did clinical research. And how Inspire found out about it is that the research was being published, and a Wall Street Journal called us for our feedback, or our quote on the SCAD ladies and the Mayo Clinic. And we said, what? Ooh, we had no idea this was happening. Which was amazing. We were so happy that we didn't know that this was happening, because we created Inspire for one, we had an idea of what we wanted, and the patient said, that's great, but we want to do something completely different. And they use our platform to help find a cure for their condition. And now there's a trial going on for about 300 or 400 patients that we're helping to recruit. And so that just came out from patient power. We had absolutely nothing to do with it. And this is a great story to show that. And we see that going on a lot in the rare disease communities as well. So just some things that we see that are happening. I think you asked me to talk a bit about where things are trending or heading out. So the patient registry that was mentioned earlier is a big area. So moving from kind of the unstructured data that we have to more structured format, especially in rare disorders. So working with a lot of the nonprofits to do that. Also using communities or social networks, social media to help in helping people stay on their treatment adherence. So the social aspect is one part of it. We see a lot of people encouraging, other people in the community to stay on regimen, to, I think I had personal experience that I was diagnosed with apnea. I had to use the horrible CPAP machine, which is a complete nightmare. And I had a lot of issues and questions, and it was hard for me to stay on it. I joined a group. I think it was just I forgot what platform it was. I got a lot, and I'm not it's funny, I work in the online community, but I'm not a sharer by nature. It's not my thing. And my wife said, just talk the talk, walk the walk. You already just do it. So I did it, and I got a lot of really good information, and helped me stick to my treatment. So I saw the value in that. But I think there's a lot more that can be done in that in the future. So I understand a lot of you come from hospitals and treatment centers. It's just one way to think of social networks as well, to get the patients involved in their treatment. And then, from a techie point of view, we see a lot of movement now, and everyone's a buzzword for a lot in the mobile space. So that's a huge area. In some of our communities, about 75 or 80% of members come to us through their mobile device. So think of that. And this is especially in the preemie community or parent-focused communities. It's a younger generation, and they visit us a lot through mobile devices. But on average, about 50% of our members visit us through a mobile device, so tablet or cell phone. And by far is iPhone. It's just amazing. But that'll change over the next few years, we'll see. So those are kind of it. How do you integrate mobile? Because it's very immediate. The attention span is less on mobile than on a desktop. How do you modify the screen to part the data that you want, that the people want to read in a interesting way? So that's an area that we're focusing on. But to talk to what has been said earlier, communities just answer a basic human need to connect with people. It's as simple as that, to connect us with people who are going through what you're going through, because no one else will understand what you're going through. So that's what we're hoping to achieve.
Thanks. And I've enjoyed my relationship with Inspire over the years and watching you guys grow. And to think you guys are at 6 million blog posts or in that range, that has to be huge for you.
Yeah, we can do anything there to accomplish.
Just let it happen.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it speaks to the desire to share their story and connect with others. I have one question, because all of us who work in healthcare deal with objections every day. We have an idea, we want to do social media, we get objection. People are, you hear it, we were talking about it earlier, doctors say, patients are going to say bad things about us if you give patients a platform.
Yeah.
What about, I think, a genuine concern about patient communities, and I have a sister who had a stage 3 ovarian cancer, she's been living with it for 6 years. She found some information online on a community that she got really excited about this herbal tea that would cure her cancer. And I went online and did some research and found that through clinical trials, they had found that this could cause tumor growth in mice. And so she was taking something that was probably promoting tumor growth. And I think that's a big fear in healthcare, that within these communities, you get these almost like urban legends about certain cures that pop up. And how do you all address that? And I know, Alicia, I know like with the breast cancer Twitter chat, you guys have clinicians who are part of that conversation. How do you guys deal with that?
For me, in the communities that I deal with, that's one reason why we've made the connections that we have with surgeons and physicians, because we feel like if we're sort of left unchecked in some ways, bad information can really take on a life of its own. So we have, as part of, because we're so virtual and we use Twitter as our primary mode of communication, the viral nature of bad information can just, absolutely rocket. And we've been very mindful about including a surgeon, physician, oncologist, radiologist that show up week after week just to help the community, I don't want to say police itself, but continue to find and reach out to the best information sources there. So we get tweets all the time like, hey, if you were drinking this milkshake, you know, from 3 to 5 every day, you know, you wouldn't have breast cancer. I mean, there's obnoxious stuff out there, but we've had, you know, we get stuff like that now. Like, are you drinking green tea? What about soy? You know, some of these common questions that keep coming up in the community, we now have resources that our sort of physician panel, if you will, or healthcare panel has gone and said, listen, this is why we feel strongly about this or against this, and here's our research to back it up. So we're very fortunate that we sort of built that into the community from the get-go.
That's great.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to touch that? Amir?
Yeah, so yes, that's a question we get a lot. We see a lot of self-monitoring also in the communities. We have mechanisms for people to report things that they find false or inappropriate. But our partnership with the nonprofits helps as well because they're subject matter experts, and then we appoint one of their staff or volunteers to be the subject matter expert moderator to make sure things are going that way. Some of the groups that we work with, the nonprofits, tell us that we want this specific topic not to be discussed in the community. It's usually some alternative medicine that's really been disproven. So we put that in the terms of use of that specific community. And what people forget, communities aren't, it's not a First Amendment issue. It's not, an open space. Some of them are actually, but ours is, there's certain rules that you have to abide by, and we enforce that pretty strictly. But also, what I tell organizations that push back is that these conversations are happening with or without you.
Yeah, exactly.
And you could be involved in the conversation to direct people in the right area and answer these, address these issues. Because this is, cat's out of the bag. It's like you're playing catch up.
Yeah.
I like to say you can get ahead of it, you can stay ahead of it, or you can get ahead of it and get run over by it.
Yes.
So, it's better to be a few steps ahead than under the wheels of the bus.
I hear you. Anybody with a burning question they feel like they have? We've got a couple minutes. We could ask a question or two. Anybody? Are you overwhelmed with content at this point?
They're all on Twitter. They're all on social media.
Yeah, they're tweeting.
Well, on Twitter, I have been tweeting for an hour now, so nothing's going on.
Yeah.
Well, guys, thank you all for being here today. Thank you to our panelists.